Her message on impeachment is catching fire, and she leads by a mile in the policy proposal race. 3 weeks to the first debate of the 2020 election season, Elizabeth Warren's supporters now likely feel as though the country is starting to see what they've seen for a very long time. Elizabeth Warren had to change venues for her event today in red state Indiana because they needed more space. And in a race defined by moments, she may have had one for herself last night. Asked about concerns that the Democratic establishment would hand the nomination to Joe Biden, here's how she responded.
But here's the deal. I don't want to be the America of 10 years back or 20 years back or 30 years back. I want to build a better America. And I think this is our moment to do this, our time in history. So you tell your friend, if she's worried, then put her worry to work. Get up off her butt and volunteer.
That was a cheering crowd in Michigan, by the way, a state Donald Trump won by just 10,000 votes in 2016, the smallest margin of any state in that election. So for Democrats, it's heartening to see this, I'm sure. A new Michigan poll shows 5 candidates ahead of Trump in statewide head-to-heads: Biden, Sanders, Buttigieg, Warren, and Harris. The table is back, Matt.
You saw in that clip what I think a lot of people don't realize about Elizabeth Warren, which is she is very dynamic on the stump. And I think you see her rise. I think a lot of things are attributable to her rise. One, obviously her position on impeachment is where the Democratic base is. I think her policies are where the Democratic base is. And importantly, probably not just where the Democratic base is, but she has an answer to the problems of deindustrialization that Donald Trump offered a false answer to. She has a real answer with policies to address that you haven't necessarily heard from others in the field yet, at least in the detailed way she has. The other thing that I liked about what I saw from her last night, I was glad she attacked Joe Biden. Not because I have anything against Joe Biden, but I want to see the Democratic candidates start attacking each other. If there's one thing I'm looking for in a Democratic candidate to emerge as the nominee of the party, I want someone who knows how to take a punch and someone who knows how to deliver a punch. That's going to be crucial in going up against Donald Trump. And she's showing that she's willing to throw a punch.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, just as you said before, we also know that Donald Trump has a certain visceral reaction to strong, smart women. So he would, he would sort of short circuit just a little bit. But we also know Joe Biden is just repackaging a more positive version of Donald Trump's Make America Great Again. And I think that's what Elizabeth Warren is sort of putting that poison in the well for Joe Biden.
Let me make sure I understand. You think the Biden candidacy is just Trump?
In a positive spin? Let's go back to the old days. The old days when? Like, when were the old days for women and people of color in this country? When were the days so great, Joe Biden? So his vision of America, when all the guys worked at the factory and everything was great, really? Was it? Because there are lots of people who couldn't get jobs at those factories based on their gender and based on their race. So his idea of America, albeit positive, it's sort of this, the greatest generation-esque idea. And there are a lot of people where it's like, if you don't even have to scratch the surface of American history. You can read a book or think about the stories from your parents or your grandparents. And so
I don't work for Joe
my
Biden.
problem with Joe Biden's
My
framing.
position in the Democratic primary is I will vote for any of the candidates' automobile.
Same.
So whomever they nominate, you got me already. But I don't know that Biden supporters feel. I think most Biden supporters feel like that's a pretty harsh assessment of what his campaign. It started with the sharpest rebuke. He took a figurative 2x4 to what most people think is the nastiest moment of the Trump presidency, Charlottesville.
And where did he say it, though? In Pennsylvania, surrounded
it's the optics
by
and the message?
Exactly. So his idea, surrounded by older white men who sort of represent, in Joe Biden's mind, the real America. And I don't think that that's Elizabeth Warren's stance. I don't think that's what Kamala Harris is trying to do. I don't think that's what Pete Buttigieg is trying to do. And so they're saying we don't need to go back to the good old days before Trump and Trumpism. We need to move forward. And moving forward means coalition building with a lot of people who either have voted in the past or who have never felt like they were part of this conversation. So we need new people in because the shadow of Russia is still there. So that 10,000 votes, part of it was partisanship, part of it's something else. So we need to make sure that we have enough people out there. So even if Putin and friends want to interfere, we still have enough people invested in making sure they have the democracy that they want.
I don't agree that Joe Biden is a makeover of Trumpism. I think that's not accurate. Joe Biden has dedicated his life to progress, to the cause of social justice, economic justice. He does look out for working class Americans. And I take your point, which is that sometimes in our discourse, when we talk about what middle America or working class America wants, we tend to focus on the swing states. We tend to focus on the white industrial Midwest to the detriment of Americans from coast to coast, of all gender identifications, of all races, of all ethnicities. I think that's a fair point. But I think it really undermines the record of Joe Biden and his vision to say that he's just Trump.
I'm not saying he's Trump at all.
I agree with you with your broader premise. I think that it's going to be a mistake for Democrats to think that pushing the blame on Trump and saying that the past was, A-OK before Trump entered the scene, I think that that's going to be really short-sighted, and I think it's going to catch up with Joe Biden throughout the primary.
I wanted to ask, I put this question, and I'm happy to have you all take the ball and run with it. This is the dream. This is what we all dream about. But I did want to stop and ask all of you the question about whether part of what's fueling, she's rising, I think, in the polls in Texas, some state-by-state polls. And I hate this phrase, having a moment. I mean, anyone that works on a campaign, they're dog years. Like no day is a moment. It's like having an infant, like long days, fast years. No one has a moment. I mean, she's got a really strong campaign built on a really strong foundation, and she's a better candidate than she was 2 years ago, full stop. She is also in the middle of a very, very, very complicated, fraught news cycle where she seems to be, I think, along with Kamala Harris, leading some of the messages and the policies around holding Trump accountable for misdeeds, criminal conduct, if you will, both changing the OLC memo and impeachment. Do you think that's helping?
I think it absolutely is on two grounds. One, that she has a message. And there are candidates in the field who don't really have a message, can't tell you why they want to be president. She has a message both about holding Trump accountable and about what she would do as president.
And she's not doing this. She's not poll testing it.
And the second thing is, she's just ready to fight.
Correct.
And that's what people want. And that's the criticism you see from Democrats about what's happening in Washington right now, where you have Democrats sort of debating with themselves, well, should we go forward with impeachment? Not. Should we do this hearing? Not.
Public
just
isn't
fight.
with us.
Just go out and fight.
And
and
this,
that's
to
what
me,
she does.
Not to compare her to Donald Trump and George Bush in one show, because then she'll never ever come on. And this is not my point. But one of the exercises in sort of the black and white nature of a campaign is that she communicates with the most clarity. I don't know that there is a Democrat more clear than her.
She's a professor. I mean, that is her. She has made a living actually breaking down very complex problems and processes to audiences across the world who some understand and some fundamentally don't. And I think what is organic about sort of this interest that voters seem to be having with her specifically is that she's doing two things at once. She is saying, I will fight Donald Trump, and you know I'm not afraid of him. But also, organically, her slogan is, I've got a plan for that.
Well, and she literally has like a stack this high of policies.
And Democrats want two things. I mean, when you talk to voters, they're saying, it's like, I need someone to beat him. I don't care if it's Alf, I don't care if it's Biden, I don't care if it's Harris.
Or the car.
It doesn't matter.
Right.
I need someone to beat him. But I also, once they get there, I need them to be able to do something once they're there. And she's like, once I get there, I've got a plan for that as well.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.